The NL East is it's probably one of the better divisions. It's not the best, I don't think.
Right. I think you would say it's probably top 4, and then you would argue if it's the third or fourth, probably between them and the AL West, if I'm just going off the top of my head. And maybe depending on how you consider the NL West and how much the Dodgers being in that,
or how good you think the Marlins are,
right,
in the NL East, actually. So the team that won last year, the Braves, did everything right except didn't show up in the playoffs.
Right. And certainly, I mean, I think you're going to go and you're going to start with the Atlanta. If you're talking about the NL East, you sort of have to start with the Atlanta Braves because that's who that division begins and ends with as far as you're looking at talent-wise. Because even though there are other good teams in this division, they are the best team in this division. Even though this isn't a preview episode, I don't feel bad about saying.
Yeah, you won't be out on any kind of limb if you pick the Braves to win the division when the time comes.
Right.
So I like to, and we haven't done this with everyone, but pick the 3 best starting pitchers in the division, and so the Braves even kind of have that because I came up with Strider first.
Right. I mean, you'd say Zach Wheeler.
Yeah, and then I thought, well, Max Fried, isn't Max Fried the other
Sale?
guy? Oh, no, I wouldn't give it to Sale now. I mean,
Jose Luzardo? Kodai Senga?
Yeah, well, Senga's hurt, so that's why I don't do them.
Right.
But Fried, I think, is probably undervalued a little bit and
he's got to
underrated.
actually play.
Yeah, well, he's playing. He's going to play this year. He's going to pitch, and he's in a contract year, I think, as well.
So you're expecting a lot out of him.
But what's interesting is when you go past those 3 starting pitchers, then you're into guys like Aaron Nola.
There's still good pitchers, but there's not nearly the depth at starting pitching that there is in the lineups in this division because there's a lot of good hitters in this division.
And the Marlins, Yuri Perez, Alcantara is hurt, so he's not going to pitch, so we don't have him.
Right. He would be a guy that would be up there.
The Nationals don't have any pitchers like that. So the Braves are going to put out basically the same lineup plus Jared Kelenic that they had last year.
Right, and which was the best lineup that might have ever been assembled, so you're kind of expecting on much of the same this season.
And I guess we can go through all the players where everybody knows how.
Right. We all know the Braves lineup. We don't really need to talk about how good Acuna and Austin Riley and Matt Olson.
Ozzie Albies.
Right. Top to bottom, this is an incredible lineup. I think the question is, it's going to be hard for them to repeat how good they were last year just because of how overwhelmingly good they were. So if they take a step back, how much of a step do they take back?
Let's just for a quick second do that. Let's say like so. Will Ronald Acuna have as good a season this year as he had last year overall?
It's hard to say that he will.
So you're saying probably not, or you're
not.
leaning against it. And I don't want to overstate on your behalf. Ozzie Albies with the 30 home runs and
I expect him to do about the same.
Austin Riley?
I expect him to do about the same.
This is a problem.
I think Olsen might take a step back. He was a little...
Well, he had 54 homers, so it's hard to do that every year.
It's hard to do that. I think Ozuna's a guy that you could get a lesser year out of. I think, Michael Harris was
he's an up-and-coming player, though, I think, Michael Harris, no?
Well, he was a guy, a tale of 2 halves last season.
Yeah, I just think he's the guy, because he's young and on the rise in his career, I think the chances of him doing better is...
But what makes the Braves crazy is you got a guy like Orlando Arcia at short, who still gives you more than most teams'
He had a really good season last year, as did Sean Murphy, who I think was probably got the best catcher in the National League moniker for last year, at least.
Right, and so that's their lineup. And top to bottom, as we said, they were the best lineup that has maybe ever played a complete season together last year. So it's hard to believe they won't at least be one of the best offenses in baseball this season. And they're hoping with the addition of Max Fried coming back and Chris Sale and Charlie Morton coming back, that their starting rotation kind of doesn't flounder its way through the season
that's what you're worried about. If you're the Braves right now, you're thinking, okay, if all 5 of those guys pitch to their expectations and
we run away with the division,
we're going to be great.
Yeah.
Chances are, this is baseball, that's not going to happen. Somebody's going to get injured or not pitch as
The
well or whatever it is.
scariest thing for you would be, for me if I was a Brave fan, would be a Spencer Strider injury, because then you're really out there with no life preserver. Because it's like you've had him the last 2 seasons and he's given you full seasons. And that's been very important. All those other guys are guys that tend to get hurt. And so if he goes down,
and they're old.
Right. You're really worried about having a year where you're rotating a bunch of guys named Joe through your starting rotation.
And it's funny you say that, because I'm thinking, so I'm going to be the nitpicky Met fan and go, yeah, well, if those guys get hurt, it's not like they have a bunch of guys beneath them that are ready for prime time, ready to come in and contribute, which I think they're going to need somebody from outside
I think
this group.
The thing that they did do, which is the difference from last season, is they've gone out and they've improved the bullpen.
Yeah, well, and the bullpen was, has been good.
Right, but bringing in Ronaldo Lopez
Yeah.
to now be the bridge to Raziel Iglesias, and now you still got guys like AJ Minter and Joe Jimenez and Aaron Bummer.
And Matzik.
Right, this is going to be a very good bullpen that if they, with their ability to score, means it's going to be really hard to beat this team.
And here's why it's important, right? Because what you have in the starting rotations, probably outside of Strider and Fried,
Are guys that don't go deep into games.
They don't go deep into games.
Sale is not a guy that goes deep unless he has one of those games where he's just on. He's probably only giving you 5, maybe 6. Same with Morton. Same with Fried.
So what is it you like to say? That bullpen could be taxed out by, early July if it goes badly for them.
Especially if guys get hurt. And the bench is...
Lots of Mets. Former Mets.
Lots of former Mets, which is weird. But I think if you're an Atlanta Brave fan, you're probably thinking the less I see of this bench, the better.
Well, and
not even because they're necessarily bad, but just because the starting lineup is so overwhelmingly good, you don't really want to be putting in your bench players.
As it would be any place, else. And Travis d'Arnaud, TDA, as he's somehow now come to be known, his tenure with the Braves, when I look at it it's not as good. It's not as good as I thought it was, but he's gotten some big hits for them, and I think that's why
as far as
they
a
love him.
backup catcher goes, if he's the guy you're bringing in for Sean Murphy, that feels pretty good.
And he's happy in the role, which he wasn't, when he wasn't earlier in his career. They bring over Luis Guillorme. Look, we Met fans love Luis Guillorme if he's getting 120 at bats a year.
His projected 93 at bats. Luis Guillorme is great.
So the more that he plays, like most of these guys, they also have Phil Evans, another guy from the Met organization who is over there. I don't know how much he's going to play for them off of their bench. And David Fletcher is sort of their versatile infielder who can get. So look, the Braves. Their lineup is so good that they will probably bludgeon most teams and have the game over by the 6th inning, which is
they're going to win a lot of laughers.
Kind of the way they're set up, and
I think they're much set up the same way that the Phillies are. The Phillies are going to do that to a bunch of teams as well. They're going to go out, pound teams into the ground, and it's not going to really matter that they might not have the greatest bullpen or the deepest starting rotation because they're going to say, yeah, but we got Kyle Schwarber, Trey Turner, Harper, and Castellanos at the top of our rotation. Deal with that.
And I think a guy who's poised to have a really good season, because I've been kind of reading about him and following him a little bit, is Real Muto, because he's healthy. I guess his legs were not good last year.
Right, and legs and catchers go together.
And he worked on his swing, and he's got a lot of confidence. So I would be surprised, because this is a guy at one point who was possibly the best catcher in baseball.
Right, and I think if you're a Philly fan, you know what to expect out of your top 4 guys. You know what you're going to get out of JT Realmuto. For this team to really challenge the Braves and for another World Series title, they got to get a year out of either Alex Boehm or Bryson Stott. Yeah. One of those guys has to finally take that next step and ascend to being like, no. I'm like one of these guys like Trey Turner and Harper. I'm playing just as well as them.
I noticed you didn't say that about Brandon Marsh.
Marsh is a guy that they have out there for his defense. Same with Johan Rojas. And those are guys that you can have out there because the rest of your lineup is so good that it takes some pressure off your team by having 2 really good defensive outfielders. And Bryson Stott's a very good defensive second baseman.
Yeah, and he gave them more with the bat than I think they expected when they first brought him up. So their lineup is good, although I still am marveling at the Phillies putting Kyle Schwarber in the leadoff spot when he has an on-base percentage. Forget about the average for a second.
It work.
Yeah. I guess you hit 40-plus home runs, and you just want him to get up as many times as he can. Their starting rotation, we already talked about Wheeler and Nola a little bit. It's interesting that in the playoffs, Ranger Suarez pitched. He was their number 3.
Taijuan Walker didn't.
And so he's back with them, this year. And I mean, talk about the all-time diss to have a good season for them and for the team not to have confidence to even put you in a game in the playoffs.
Everything I heard was that he was just shot. He just had nothing. He had like a dead arm at the end.
And we knew that as Met fans that he's a first-half pitcher, and he has trouble in the second half.
They'll take it because he gets them through that. And then you're looking at the guy they brought in was Michael Lorenzen, right?
No, he pitched them last year, so he's on their depth chart, but he's not there. As a matter of fact, he is rumored to be talking with the Mets.
Interesting.
Right now, so he hasn't yet signed.
So they're counting on a year out of Christopher Sanchez then.
Yeah, because when you go deeper into like most teams, if you go deeper into you got Spencer Turnbull, who has some starting pitching
with the
experience.
Tigers, I believe.
Right. So, but then you get to that bullpen, and Every year I look at this and I'm thinking, man, they just have a lot of faith in the guys they have there because they don't really bring in big guys.
They haven't brought anybody in, so you're counting on another year out of Jose Alvarado. You're counting on another year out of Gregory Soto and Sir Anthony Dominguez and Matt Strom.
And how about in the playoffs listing? Orion, what a great name, Orion Kirkering. I love that name.
Showed off that slider.
And Connor Brogdon, this is the year. This is the year you're going to get the Connor Brogdon we've been looking for all this time.
And I think when you go to their bench again, they've got a guy like Whit Merrifield as a bench player.
That's
for
a great pickup.
That's
I think
a good pickup.
That's a great because this is a guy that actually, if he had to play 80 games at multiple positions,
you're happy with that,
right? Right. He gives you speed. I mean, he's
right.
He
Edmundo
still steals
Sosa
bases.
is going to give you a decent backup to Trey Turner. Kristen Pace,
It's your defensive center fielder.
Exactly. Garrett Stubbs gives you some pop out of the catcher position. Your Cody Clemens is a nice story.
Really? I don't know. Why?
Right,
Because his name is Clemens?
Yeah,
is that why?
pretty much.
I don't know.
That's entirely why.
Not about his baseball too much.
Right. But I didn't say he was a good baseball player. I said he was a good story.
So, yeah, the bench, again, they've been blessed, except for Bryce Harper, with pretty good health.
But health is always a concern for every team.
My friend Mike Berkman was doing some promotions for Major League Baseball, and he was saying, so I'm doing. I got to go around the league and put guys in there that are sort of league wide and baseball stars, and he didn't have Bryce Harper in there. He's like, really? Harper's kind of like, oh no. I said, no, Bryce Harper.
No, he's still
Bryce Harper. Come on, I mean, this guy is
especially in the postseason.
Yeah. This guy is a Hall of Fame player playing right now. You're watching a Hall of Famer, folks. So enjoy while you can. And then
we get to our New York Mets, and while last year we were brimming with confidence and hope before the season, making things as foolish as World Series predictions.
Oh, I can't believe you brought that up. Yeah, that was me. And we're not picking teams here, so don't get me wrong here.
But our forecast for them and our primer about their setup for this season is not nearly as overwhelmingly positive this season.
And they've resisted the temptation to go out and do what they did last year, which we both
spend.
They did the year before, I guess. But bringing in those two guys, which I think we both feel was, hey, you took a shot. It didn't work, and the result is you ate a lot of money and you rebuilt your minor league system.
Right. They pivoted quickly, and now you're looking at what is a transition year for this New York Mets team, because the strength of this team, I think you'd still say, is their starting lineup. That
I agree.
They were a team that was profoundly unlucky last season in the metrics in terms of BABIP and expected batting average. But just top to bottom, they've got a lot of solid hitters on this team, with some young potential breakout candidates and guys like Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty. And you're going to count on good seasons out of guys like Pete Alonso and Lindor.
Well, Pete's in a contract year, so even though I always say that he won't play any harder than he normally does, it's a contract year. So he's
a guy like Brandon Nimmo is going to
play left field, which I think is going to help.
And he's been one of the better players in baseball the last few seasons. I think just the ultimate questions for these Mets star around two guys.
Yep. I know what you're going to say.
Jeff McNeil and Sterling Marte.
Okay, and actually, I was going to say that my expectation is both of those players. I was going to say two different players.
Oh, interesting.
Both of those players, I'm expecting bounce back seasons for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a lot more confidence in that than I do saying that Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty are going to become the kind of player the Mets had hoped they would be.
The Mets need them to be.
Right. If the Mets are going to win 85 or more games somehow, some way, which I'm not predicting, those guys have to outperform what the fans expect of them now.
Well, I think one of the things that's going to really hurt them is that with losing Kodai Senga for the first potentially month or two of the season, when you look at this starting rotation,
it's a bunch of number 4 starters.
Yeah, I mean, Jose Quintanilla is maybe
Quintana is a
nice number 2.
That's being very nice. I mean, on any other team you could put him, like if he was on the Braves,
he'd be like their 3.
Yeah, at best he might be their 4.
Right,
behind Charlie Morton.
A guy like Luis Severino has top of the, he can have stuff like that, but he's a guy that's never been able to kind of keep it together for a full season, and especially, health-wise or control-wise.
Don't we hope he was tipping his pitches as Met fans? That's what they were saying. He was tipping his pitches.
Praying.
So we figured that out. So now he doesn't do that anymore. He's going to be the old,
And how much are you really counting out of Sean Manaea and Adrian Hauser? You're counting on them to get innings for you. And I think, understand, that was a problem for this Mets team last season, was just having starting pitchers throw innings.
Yeah, and Tyler McGill's going going to run it out there again. And when David Peterson gets healthy, they'll probably try to run him out there. And, they've got a bunch of guys who have had experience starting in the major leagues, just not necessarily successful at that starting.
Right. And the problem is you got a guy in the very back of the bullpen that if he's, with him being back and fully healthy this year, you can count on a lot out of Edwin Diaz. And then
you got the rest of the story.
Right, then you're like, oh, yeah, we have to get to Edwin Diaz.
Yeah, the only other relief pitcher that I have confidence that'll have a good year, and hopefully they won't run him into the ground, is Brooks Raley, who actually had a very good year last year. But beside that, I
mean, the Shintaro Fujinami experience is, from all what I've heard, is the best defined as a death-defying roller coaster. It's also very good, and then it's also very bad.
The Mets signed a Japanese pitcher. It wasn't Ohtani.
We're getting
it wasn't Yamamoto. It wasn't Imanaga.
Right. We're going to get another Adam Ottavino experience this season.
Yeah, that whole situation is...
And the Drew Smith experience of the Mets keep believing in this guy.
This is the year for him, too, right? He's got great stuff. He's got great stuff.
Jake Diekman.
Unfortunately, it's not baseball stuff. He's good in the kitchen.
I think the big thing for this Mets line, this Mets bullpen is they're different from last season, in that last year everybody just threw that slurve. They threw that slider, that hard-cutting slider pitch, and they all kind of looked exactly the same. And this year, they don't have that. Guys have different pitches. Guys have different weapons. So hopefully it won't kind of just be facing a bullpen of progressively worse versions of the same guy.
You bring up a great point, because you'd like to think the team that, like the Mets, that think of themselves as now as trying to get towards the Dodgers level of analytical and building their system, that they would have noticed that, all our relief pitchers kind of throw the same way in the same pitch.
Right.
That's probably not so good for fooling the other guys. Bench-wise, I put Vientos in at DH and put DJ Stewart on the bench.
Right. It depends on who you talk to, which one is going to be which. I think any Met fan is kind of hoping Vientos just wins the job.
Oh,
yes.
We
don't have to talk about
100% feel about that. But, it's interesting. So they have these guys, and DJ Stewart's the Buck Showalter holdover.
But then you've got a lot of,
you guys that David Stearns, the president of baseball operations, is familiar with, including Narvaez and G-Man Choi, who he traded to
Tyrone
Tampa. Tyrone Taylor played for him in Milwaukee. Adrian Hauser played him for Milwaukee.
Joey Wendell's a guy from Tampa Bay, so he's brought in a lot of guys that have been on playoff teams that have been proven winners, so you're hoping to kind of get a culture injection on this team, I think, a bit through your bench.
I think it's a great thing to say that, because, the Mets don't have guys in their organization that have experienced a whole lot of winning, except for the 101 win season in 2022, in which they were dispatched in 3 games by the Padres, and they hadn't been in the playoffs since 2016 in the wild card game.
Right, exactly.
So Pete hasn't been there a whole lot.
Right, Nimmo, McNeil, all the young guys. They need guys that know how to kind of get them through a season. And then I think when you go past the Mets, you got a team that I think is going to be neck and neck with them this year in the NL East, and last year's surprise playoff team in the Miami Marlins.
Yeah, I don't know why, and maybe it's my own prejudice, and I'm sure it is. When I look at the Marlins and I look at that lineup, I'm like, am I really going to, is this the team that I think is going to be putting up runs every night and without the...
Well, I think that
pitchers.
That was one of the things. They were the best team in baseball in one-run games.
It all went well for them last year.
Right, and that is something that historically is not a good sign for sustained success, because that's the kind of thing where just you win all the close ones, all the breaks go your way. Because when you look at this lineup, you're counting on a lot out of Tim Anderson.
Right. So and I think that was the right place for him to go for a lot of reasons. Number one,
I think it's actually a really good signing.
The Marlins didn't have a shortstop, so that
right. They didn't have a shortstop. It's a team that was in need of some personality and some fire, because they felt like a very quiet team. And so having an outspoken guy like Tim Anderson, I think is a good thing.
Because
for that.
Luis Arias, who had the great year last year, he's not the guy to lead the team vocally.
Right.
And
Chisholm struggled so much last season, he couldn't do it.
One of my favorite players in all of baseball, though. I really root for this player.
Right, and then you've got guys like Josh Bell and Jake Berger and Brian De La Cruz, who are all solid.
Well, I would pull Josh Bell aside and just say, because he's so much of an older player, that you're expecting him to do things, in terms of helping.
He's got to be a leader in this
Right. Because I think Jake Berger has a lot more, upside and earlier in his career, certainly. And Brian De La Cruz, again, another guy who, if you watch him against the Mets, you think this guy was like an all-star caliber player, because he plays
always
great.
Shows up.
He plays great against them. Jesus Sanchez, also a guy that, they kind of scratch their heads going, this guy should be better.
But at the same time, they got Avicel Garcia as their DH, and he feels a bit of aged corpse-like at this point.
And at the catcher position, Nick Fortes is probably going to get most of the work back there. And he's not a guy that you can expect a whole lot from. So the loss of Alcantara and is really the big thing for them because it moves everybody.
Right, but even though he didn't have the most amazing year last year, he's still you're getting innings out of him instead of guys like Trevor Rogers.
And there's another pitcher that, I have this because he pitches well against the Mets, and he looks great when he's out there. He's got great stuff.
Okay, that's a you thing, because I'm not high on Trevor Rogers.
And his performance would have you be right and me. Like, just having watched him pitch,
right.
He looks the part.
Well, you have two guys at the top of the rotation that you can count on in Jesus Luzardo and Yuri Perez. Yuri Perez should throw more innings this year, now that he's had a full year in the major, so you think he's going to pitch most of the season. But again, it's the kind of thing where if it's a year where they're not doing so hot, do the Marlins shut him down early again? Because why waste him?
Yeah. We'll talk about this in another podcast, just about, because we touched on it in terms of how long you can expect these young pitchers to pitch. So I think Yuri Perez is a good example, because depending on how the Marlins do, I think you're right. If they're really not in it and he's at 150, 60 innings,
why wouldn't you?
They might say, let's not. No, we don't need to push him to 100. If they're in the race,
then he will.
Then he might do that. And Braxton Garrett, has shown some flashes, but I don't think you're expecting him to be an anchor of any staff.
But the problem is he kind of needs to be if they're going to be able to keep up this year and contend for another playoff spot.
And they need a guy like that and a guy like Edward Cabrera to give them innings. And Trevor Rogers never has been able to give them really. I think for one season he gave them some consistent innings. So
and I think their bullpen is that is better than people think, because people don't know who's in the bullpen. A guy like Tanner Scott probably is much better than people realize.
Right. And last year they needed him because they won a lot of those close games, and that's because the bullpen
and AJ Puck
outperformed.
And Andrew Nardi were a very, very good trio of pitchers for them.
Yeah, and Ryan Weathers, I think, also had an okay year for them last year. So I think they'll have enough to get through if they don't have to pitch like the others with too much early in the season.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then you get to, so I see that Vinny Pasquantino is on the Marlins, and I guess I thought he wasn't in a Royal. I'm surprised.
Yeah, he was.
He was. So I don't know that he got moved over here, and that's my bad to not do that. But he's a guy, if he were on the, I don't think he's on the Marlins, though. I don't know why he's listed here in the depth chart. Garrett Hampson, fortunately,
fortunately, he's playing behind Tim Anderson now.
And I'm looking for John Birdie, and I don't see him on the depth chart here, so I'll have to go back and check that, because I'm not seeing, this isn't working for me. I think I have the wrong bench here.
Oh, yeah, I think you've got the Royal bench here.
Yeah, I got the Royal bench, so I don't have the Marlin bench, because I know John Birdie was going to play shortstop until they brought in Tim Anderson, and they were saying, why do you, he's not a guy you want to be playing 200.
Right, the fact that Birdie is now a bench player is a much better thing for the Marlins, and I think that for the Marlins, they at least have some hope for this season. They're a team that certainly is going to expect to compete for another.
I think they believe. I think that's the important thing. Is after last year, they believe.
And I think that you get down to the final team in the NL East, in the Washington Nationals, and they were a team that played above what their expectations were,
which was
season.
Nothing.
Right? Nobody expected anything of them, and they were pesky. I didn't like that.
Yeah, and pesky at the wrong time for a lot of teams.
Right.
They played their best baseball late in the season when they spoiled a few teams' chances to get back into it.
Right, and I think their most exciting player is certainly going to be the guy at the top of their lineup in C.J. Abrams, because I think he's by far their best young player. That certainly he's flashing a lot of talent.
And I like Lane Thomas as well. I think he's a really smart, good guy to have in the 2-hole. Handles the bat pretty well. Can run a little. Has some power. Good player. Then
Joey Meneses has probably been the best feel-good story in baseball.
Right, out of nowhere, he came in at age 31 as a rookie or 30 as a rookie.
Right, and has been good.
Yeah, and is going to be an anchor in that lineup. He's probably going to bat behind the guy they brought in, and Joey Gallo.
Well, I think what's nice for a guy like Joey Gallo is you can count on Joey Gallo to be a professional for this team. This is a young team without a lot of direction. So having a guy like Joey Gallo in the clubhouse is probably a very good thing.
And I think you're right in that he's not being counted on to carry a team that's going to be lucky to win 70 games.
No, he's counted on there to be, provide the culture for young guys like Keibert Ruiz, who they're counting on to be
He's the catcher of the present and the future.
Of the present and the future. And I'm sure if the national organization is like, no, Mets, we've got the stud young catcher of the future, not you guys.
Yeah, and Nick Senzel is going to play over at third base, and he's a veteran player coming
Same
over
with
from
Victor Robles.
Yeah, he's been there a long time.
Victor
Victor Robles is just one of those guys who's like, yeah, I'm going to be a career national, and no one's going to know it.
But the problem for the Washington Nationals begins and continues almost ad infinitum with their starting rotation because, it is brutal.
And something, when you watch a team play in the same division for your favorite team, as we do the Nationals against the Mets, Josiah Gray, who's pitched often against the Mets, apparently he crossed the threshold at some point last year and wasn't the guy that I thought, great, Josiah Gray's pitching, we're going to get this guy. And he actually pitched pretty well. So he is their default number one, I guess.
But Josiah Gray still is a guy that you're generally like, oh, yeah, we can hit Josiah Gray.
Well, I think they would think that. I think he's hoping that he wants to be the one that you can hit.
Right. The problem is everybody else.
Yes, Mackenzie Gore, who wasn't he a Padre at one point,
so.
Right? And had some modest success. Patrick Corbin is still he's still under that contract with them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're paying him like $20-odd million a year.
Painful.
He's got to be like
they've got Trevor Williams,
70 years old now.
Yeah,
Trevor Williams, we loved as a Met fan and all that, but when he has to pitch,
when he's penciled into your starting rotation, that's not good. Same with Jackson Rutledge,
and they don't really have reinforcements at the minor league level or lower levels that are ready to come in and step and be major leaguers.
At the bullpen, let's be honest.
And they've been not good for a while, so you'd like to think there's some draft guys coming up through the system, and I think they re-signed Mike Rizzo as their GM. They got some direction as ownership. So
to be fair to them, they've certainly fixed their lineup pretty relatively quickly in terms of having some young guys with talent in there. So you're probably hoping that you get some development in your bullpen this year. Is this a year that Hunter Harvey kind of puts it together in your bullpen, or a Tanner Rainey, that you could count on some guys that you can start finding them here in your bullpen, because you've got a lot of question marks back there, and you're going to be throwing a lot of different guys. I think Jordan Weems was the guy they were counting on stuff from.
And Kyle Finnegan, did you mention him being the closer?
Yes.
I remember him pitching with them. I didn't realize that he would be a
Who else is it going to be?
Exactly, and that's kind of how it happens. And a bench of a team who's not expected to win many games can't be expected to be very good, and it's not.
It's not. The only guy I think on here that anybody that isn't a Washington National fan might have heard of before is Alex Call.
Yeah, or Carter Kaboom, because he's got the name. He's got the great name.
Riley Adams has caught for some other teams, but Stone Garrett.
I love that. Stone Garrett he's like the protagonist in a detective novel,
like a hard-boiled
Stone Garrett. He's like apparently he's a baseball player, but I think he might have more notoriety as a.
They've got a lot of other than it's just a lot of guys that nobody's really ever heard of. So I think if you're the Nationals, your outlook on the season is developing the young players in your lineup and hoping one pitcher, whether in your rotation or your bullpen, or hopefully more than one, breaks out and has a year for you where you can then look at 2025, where there's a lot of free agents on the market, and be excited about your future, because you do have some young guys that you're counting on to have good seasons this year.
We also didn't mention, or maybe you did, and I missed it. They brought in noted Met thorn inside Jesse Winkler, and he's on the IL right now. And I only looked at the starting lineup one last time to see, well, what is the average on base percentage of the starting lineup? And Jesse Winkler's the highest rated at 350. There's nobody else above 317 or 320 in terms of 324.
That's rough.
So they're not getting on base, and so
that makes it hard to score.
That's going to. They don't have a lot of power. They don't get on base, and they're pitching a suspect. Sounds like a fifth place team to me.
Yeah, very much so.
So we'll cover the last two divisions in our final two primers,
and then it's baseball season.
We're racing towards opening day.